Well, guys, it just doesn't get much bigger than this in markets. Increased volatility, insider traders doing something very interesting, dark pool transactions coming through near the peaks, and of course, leaked information. Yes, that and more coming up in today's show as we talk about what just happened to semiconductors and whether it means much to us as traders and investors. More importantly, what's going on when it comes to flows? Well, today we uncover some of the latest data to do with the king of crypto, and it's looking pretty interesting. Let's go through stocks, commodities, and cryptos together right now. This show is not to be missed. See you in a moment. Well, welcome back everybody to the daily show where we discuss markets around the world, including the latest macro data and of course lead indicators and the hottest charts. My name's Tom, and in today's video we need to discuss semiconductors moves, energy, big bank earnings, and of course, much, much more. But let's get into the story that everybody's starting to talk about, which is, of course, crypto and corporate insiders. Yes, it looks like, according to Jason Gottfried over on X, we're seeing corporate insiders buying at the lowest rate they've done so in a while. And this has a lot of people wondering whether we're going into a slowing bull market. More importantly, probably a rotational market. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about it. We're 2 years into the bull. We've seen the biggest Mag 7 stocks lead, and now it could be time for some of the small caps to come through. Now, we've been discussing this idea for the last 2 weeks here on the channel, and it does look like it could be on the horizon because, of course, what's different about this earnings season than any other? Well, it really has to do with single stock volatility more than the SP 500. In fact, have a look here at the SP 500 vol versus single stocks. What this is telling us is that we need to be patient this earnings season, but more importantly, the moves after each and every earnings report could be absolutely wild in the vicinity of something between 5 and even 15%. If you've been trading the market for a long time, you'd know that that is unusual in itself. What isn't unusual, though, is where we're at in terms of the bull market so far. Of course, this is a great visual representation of what's done so far well, which is, of course, communication services and technology and semis, and what's started to do very well, which has been banks, and in recent times, utilities, which we've been talking about. Basically, we're into the mid-late cycle style market. And of course, this could mean that things like healthcare could be very interesting in the future, and that this is a market which is going to have a lot of rotation into it. Now, if you think about the overall base of what's going on in markets in terms of how many stocks actually make up the S&P 500, yes, it's 500 stocks, but it's heavily weighted towards the upside. So what that means is that we might see smaller S&P moves, but larger rotational moves as Wall Street floats around into all of the different sectors during the later cycles. And of course, we'll be covering that on show, so make sure to subscribe if that's something that interests you. Let's talk about big flows though, because of course we've been discussing the idea now for 2 weeks that Bitcoin is on the rise, and it just looks like it's getting better and better and better in terms of a large move. We know that when the ADX goes this low, usually that means that it's a calm before the storm and a large move either way is about to happen, and things have been kind of shaking up towards the upside. In fact, have a look here at Bitcoin ETF daily fund flows, the highest in 4 months. And in fact, one of the highest we've seen pretty much in 2024 since realistically the March height was there. Now, is this a good sign? You would have to argue it's not a negative sign. And this happened all over the last 24 hours. And of course, this basically has led into the bigger move that we just saw on crypto as it broke through. But it doesn't just start there. It starts with liquidations. It starts with whales making terrible decisions and unfortunately losing quite a lot of money. As we reported over the last week, we knew that large traders were around, and it looked like someone in particular had placed a large bullish bet. Well, guess what? They got double liquidated over the last kind of week. And in particular, they were short and getting squeezed at this point even further to the wrong side. So while they were short, everyone else was pushing long. And this has a lot of people discussing what's going on in markets. It also looks like Tesla could be on the move with Bitcoin, which could mean that maybe Elon Musk or somebody else is going to discuss it. As we know, Bitcoin works on hype stories. So Tesla moved around $760 million in Bitcoin over the last 24 hours. And this has a lot of people saying, well, what's going up here? I did do a poll over on X and I asked the question, do you think Elon Musk is going to post about about Bitcoin over the next couple of days, and over 55% of respondents believed yes. Now, of course, does it really matter? Well, in my opinion, it doesn't at all. We follow the flows, we follow the price action, but as we know, when it comes to hype beasts, when it comes to crypto, this is the type of thing that has always moved markets. People get hyped, they fall into some stupid storyline, and then they end up getting destroyed as they run through a new market move. Speaking of getting destroyed, if you're on the wrong side of this earnings season, as we know it's going to be big, but Citi, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, etc. came out with their reports. And of course, Goldman in particular was very good. We'll look at a deep dive of that in just a moment. But TSM and Netflix are going to be the most important, particularly TSM, now that we've seen the leak of ASML. So effectively that disappointed markets, and it sent NVDA and other semiconductors down anywhere between 5 and 10%. So large moves going on now. As we know, the volatility will be fierce. A lot of this is living up to pretty much what you would expect. So Netflix and TSM might be even bigger now. So it could be upwards of maybe plus minus 8% on that day. But Netflix is also going to be 8. These are huge. These are multi-billion dollar moves, and they mean a big deal. Let's talk about Goldman Sachs. Here we've got the earnings nuggets kind of earnings report here. And you'll see that the big number for Goldman Sachs that everyone's talking about is earnings per share, $8.40, up 54% year on year. And net revenues, $12.7 billion, up 7% year on year. Most of this really came from trading desks, all sorts of things to do with that. But really, when we're looking at all of these banks and we're looking at kind of how things are going, actually, we'll just move over here to Citi. You'll notice that in general, the numbers are good, and they really show that effectively we're seeing strong growth in the banks are breaking out, and it really tells you that deregulation and debt taking is back on board in the US. Now, as long as people are writing debt and people are prepared to take debt, that tells you that sentiment is relatively good. One of the biggest reads that you can see for sentiment is the amount of people that are starting small businesses. And we know that is the highest level right now since just before the global financial crisis. Sound ominous? Well, that could be because it might actually be kind of scary. Now, Walgreens was one that has a lot of people scratching their heads, but it really shouldn't. The stock has been the worst performer. If you actually scroll back and you have a look at the 2-year bull market summary that we had before, you'll notice that WBA has been a horrible performer, but they just announced a couple of things. WBA is refocusing on its legacy strength in retail pharmacy-led companies. The company plans to close approximately 1,200 underperforming stores over the next 3 years, with about 500 closures targeted for fiscal 2025. Now, overall, this is fine. You might say, well, wait a second, this 41% year-on-year decline, blah, blah, blah. Remember, this is what markets do. We talk a lot about this. In fact, I've done a lot of speeches where I discuss that your logical brain and what the price action's actually been showing you will be often opposite. Wall Street is the master of basically the bait and switch. And that's what it's been doing to some of the whales in Bitcoin recently, and it's probably doing it on something like WBA. I saw a lot of news articles today saying the pain's still to come on that. Well, we'll see about that. It had one of the biggest inflows you've seen in quite a while. AAII sentiment survey, we know that, of course, the bulls are starting to get incredibly bullish, which usually means that we're at that FOMO line. We pushed higher than this week than most people expected. We went to positive gamma. We obviously switched the positive gamma to 58.60 over the last 24 hours, and that became too much for the markets. And since then, of course, we've sold a little bit. Is it all over for the bulls? Well, that's not necessarily true, but of course we do expect volatility. You always have to into elections. And then we're wondering whether the Russell 2000 in particular, which held up very well over the last 24 hours thanks to KRE, might do even better. Remember, we're at all-time highs with a really high VIX. This is unusual. It's not impossible, but it certainly is unusual, and it's something that you want to pay attention to. Just a random chart I thought I'd pop in here just shows you that CTAs have been purchasing back into oil. So even though we've seen oil drop off over the last 48 to 72 hours, which we expected it would drop, this is not necessarily a bad thing, because remember, CTAs have started to pump back in to that commodity, and that can be a big deal. Now, we promised some big dark pool transactions, so let's discuss it. Firstly, let's have a look here at semiconductor bull positions. We obviously know massive dark pools came through, that semiconductors broke to the upside, and now they've got crunched back into this level. We'd like to see this level be purchased. Of course, it's very important that happens. But I will mention there are a couple of large trades coming through. In particular, we mentioned the resistance of the NASDAQ over the last 24 hours. Well, as it turns out, a large dark pool transaction had gone through. And this is for the ProShares short triple Q, big trade going through there, second largest in the last 2 years. And that is a fairly big deal. Another one also was semiconductor traders. They were sneaky during the session. In fact, they were placing through a very, very large dark pool transaction, just getting ready to have a little bit of a short on the old semiconductors. And you can see here, that's what's happened. Now, what we'd be looking for here, especially with semiconductors, is potentially for these shorts to be closed. I mean, that's a pretty big transaction. The other one on the Qs is a pretty big transaction. It could mean there's further dipping to go before we actually see a rally. But I don't think that semiconductors are over and it's double top and everything's going to blow up or anything like that. These are large trades, but they're done so in leveraged funds. Now, when that happens, that tends to be short-lived, and I think that's important to note. We also saw a huge trade coming in on gold miner ETFs, which I find interesting. Of course, we are very bullish on gold here over the medium long term, looking for $3,000 an ounce. So gold stocks getting a large dark pool transaction last 24 hours as well. And then there are just a couple of outliers that I thought I'd bring in. DJT, of course, stock with very bad fundamentals, has been up recently, crushing a lot of people. But a huge trade just went through and it sold from that point. So again, you'd have to think that could be a temporary top for DJT and maybe it's going back down into the election. Also notable, a huge trade coming in on FXI, which is obviously China funds. They're getting very close to a nice level. We did expect them to sell. Of course, we talked about all of the huge transactions the other day, along with the technical resistance. And then we've moved down. We cautioned against buying the dip because, of course, the dip didn't look dippy enough. And now it has dipped a little bit more. Is it good? Well, you'll see on the charts. It's not quite at the levels that we'd like, but it's certainly getting closer for the position base or investor that is wanting to take some risk on. GDX was the best performer over the last 24 hours, everybody. Semiconductors was the worst, and solar continues getting absolutely decimated into this election season. And you'll notice the KRE had a phenomenal 5 days, 6.69%. These bank earnings continue to push it up, and it really is one of the better sectors at the moment. I know regional banks seems terrifying, but at the same time, it's doing the right stuff and it's breaking out the way you'd like it to. Let's talk SP 500. We hit 58.60. We struggle around that zone and then we sell off. Is this really a worry for the bulls? Well, the answer is probably not really. I mean, it's just a standard sell into a little bit of support. You can see here we're on a 2-hour 20. That's not going to be enough. 57.75 might be an interesting point to look at on your charts. But you'll notice here, yes, it's an engulf towards the negative end. Does that mean enough? Well, you can see plenty of engulfs go into sideways markets. Not always does it mean there's a sell around the horizon. In terms of levels that I will be looking at, I'll be looking at lows under 57.65. I'll be looking at 57.80 to see where the buyers are around there. And you'll notice this was actually the options low level for that day. I don't have the updates here, I don't think. Let me just quickly see if I've got them for you guys. But in realistic terms, I do. I'll pop them in now for you. Here we go. So in terms of the levels for the low for the next 24 hours, we're looking at 57.59, so around there, which funnily enough actually matches very nicely with the lows that you would expect if that does happen. And then, of course, 58.72, so basically right where we got to over the last 24 hours. So the market's trapped 68% of the time between those two levels. Again, if we do see further selling, this would be where I'd expect first buyers to really be in terms of technical levels. And if we go further, then of course that 56.80 becomes quite enticing for buy the dippers during October. In terms of a measurement as well, we'll have to look at that. That would actually be about 3%. You couldn't really expect more than 3 to 5% considering we saw two large sales, one in August, one in September during the start. And those are already statistically kind of the normal corrections you would see in a year, unless you're going into some form of crash or something, which we don't see the signs of yet. Let's have a look at the options flows for the S&P. You'll notice here still very positive when it comes to the end of the week. In terms of what's happening over the 16th, you'll notice 5800 becomes a very strong call strike. A lot of puts starting to come through as well, and 5770, No surprises, right around where we just had the technical level, 57.80. That's where the put walls seem to be. So if markets do keep pushing down here a little bit, I think we know where the buyer is going to try to sit. And of course, we haven't moved back into a significant positive gamma until most likely near the end of the week. So there's a little bit of shenanigans going here in the 0DTE world. A lot of people trying to push that 57.80 as being, under that's going to potentially cause a waterfall effect. We are not there. Let's move over to NVIDIA. 140 is just too much for it. Probably no surprise. That's an all-time high. Markets got to it. Markets sold a little bit off that point. We'll look at the charts in a moment. No clear kind of put level here for NVIDIA, so we'll look at the charts instead. And Tesla remains stuck between that kind of 210, 215, and 225. You'll notice here 225 becoming the kind of line in the sand for calls, in particular this week. And the puts still remain very, very strong between 215 and 200. So still some strength there across the board. Let's move over now to the stock markets and just in general, the best charts that we're looking at right now. Treasuries bounced off that level we would have liked to seen. 61.8 fib, bam, straight up off that. Very, very nice level there for treasuries if you are someone trying to position for a longer term kind of position. Dollar index still at resistance, no updates there. We've updated that plenty of times. Copper moved down to the first level that we wanted to see a reaction at. It's beautiful to see little reactions at our key levels, guys. So there we go. And of course, this has us wondering whether China has dropped enough yet, because of course we're basically using copper, iron ore, and China kind of as a read across the board. And gold looks like it might even want to try to make a new high. So that's great for our longer term positions. Obviously, GDX showing huge trades over the last 24 hours. If you're in those trades from last week, that is a bit of a day trade D-scale, then cool, that's good. Gold stock in the middle of the overall ascending channel. So yeah, nothing really to report there too much. I think silver will give an opportunity soon as well. But again, nothing to update that I'm really like, wow, I love silver or anything. Any more than just the medium long terms. US oil didn't quite get down to, I guess you would say, like 69.50 a barrel, but it did bounce just off this trend line. Of course, you can kind of, these are a bit subjective, so you can kind of see it's bounced pretty close to it. When we go to the smaller time frames, very difficult to get in as a day trader. Swing traders may like this level. I think the downside possibility is still there into 68.50. But in general, if the bulls are going to come in, somewhere within this next $2 a barrel should be where they start to play. What about Tesla? Well, it could be setting up for a pretty cool island reversal. So we know that in this area is where these kind of put walls, there's potential buyers sitting there. We've now got 3 days, long leg doji, long leg doji, long leg doji. That means indecision at this point. If we gap up, that's going to be an island reversal. Could be an interesting day trade. So certainly Tesla setting up a little bit better. And I'll move this just above in terms of an alert. So if we get that, that will be a cool level. Now, ASML was pretty much the discussion point of the last 24 hours. Look, the chart looked like crap all the way since July. It's never recovered properly. The market's obviously been sniffing out pretty bad kind of reports here. But it looks like these were accidentally published. Generally speaking, I guess the markets themselves have said, you know what, that's not what we expected. This doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the rest of the semiconductors are bad. It's ASML. It's not necessarily all of the semiconductor market. Let's have a look here at NVIDIA. You can see it hit the 140, sold off. It's back at roll reversal at this point. Is that a low enough? I think it held relatively well. I wouldn't be super negative on NVIDIA or anything. In fact, if it does keep pulling back, let's say it got to 115, to me, that would be a fairly strong buy zone. So I think it's significant that, you know, something like NVIDIA broke through this downward consolidation. I believe that pullbacks are being met by bull demand on these particular markets, so I'm not going to look too much further into that. Semiconductors across the board fell down to their first support line. You can see here the index market came down to the daily 20 moving average. So this breached. Maybe it's a false break. I mean, of course, there's no real weekly up there yet, but I don't think it's a false break. Again, I think the markets are getting ready to go bullish, and this is just the normal shenanigans that happens. It's why you don't really pay attention to the daily news, and instead you look at the flows, you look at what the movements look like. So we'll keep watching this. We'll keep looking for dark pool transactions. We'll particularly look for whether we get a close of a dark pool transaction if it keeps falling lower, because I think that is where things get really interesting. Now, actually, I want to go over here and have a look at WBA because, of course, Walgreens has been one of the worst performers for quite some time. This was a significant shift that just happened over the last 24 hours. And I know you might be looking at that and saying, well, why would I ever want to buy this stock? It's horrible. Yeah, but whenever they do this type of jigging of the business, this is a fairly significant move. It's obviously really excited the market bulls, and I think it's one that we might have a look at on our live streams. So, of course, volatility and volume has been very high. Volume in particular been huge in recent weeks, and this shows me that some fund was already buying this. So it just shows you sometimes there are diamonds and even trash once you see the market make a fundamentally large shift. Let's have a look here at the Hang Seng. We can see it dropped to a new low. That's not necessarily a bad sign. It's not quite low enough for what I would like, which is 19.5-ish area to maybe even 18.5. I think it could go lower. But of course, investors may be saying, well, you know what? Geez, I'm getting a bit of a discount. Eventually, China's going to come back with the goods and it's going to look a lot better. I would agree with that statement. I just think that, from traders' perspective, it's not really a trade. But we did see that FXI getting some large positions on it over the last 24 hours. So someone did buy down here, and they're probably just looking at it as, well, wait a second, we're getting a 17.55% discount on the run. Basically, when you start looking at it, okay, let's say it's gone up from here to here. That's 22% up. Sure, that's pretty good. But now we know that effectively China is going to make switches. So they're getting it really at the same price that they were buying in 22 and 23. You've got to put things back into perspective. So yeah, not without its own risks, but an interesting level. When we're looking at healthcare, we actually saw healthcare perform fairly well versus the SPY over the last 24 hours. And you'll notice here it pulled back, but it gave this really nasty looking candle. So now we can actually set alerts above that. And if that happens, it's going to be a good sign. So healthcare in particular, I haven't really lost faith in it. I think it's an interesting sector moving forward if you're a position-based multi-month kind of hodler. Another area of interest is going to be US 2K. Look at this thing. Didn't quite set the alert at 2280, but it has been pretty much the strongest sector this week, which we suspected it may be. And if you have a look here, KRE is pushing those highs. It's trying to break out, thanks in part and pretty much due to XLF, which has been the financial stocks doing very well this earnings season so far. US 100 pulled back. Not much to really report here. Daily 20 moving average could be more interesting on this chart. And you'll notice here that we have, in general, a lot of more consolidation. We hit that kind of key resistance. We've sold a little bit. I wouldn't really look into it too much more than that. Have we got a replication buy here? Not in my opinion, but smaller timeframes could be interesting. If we actually went as low as 15 minutes, some people may be looking for like a high above 20,273 to activate further purchasing. I would say you've got to be very careful then of 20,446. But we know that the bulls are out this earnings season. So whatever vol we get here is still going to probably be bought up eventually. Now let's move over to Bitcoin. Wow, what a cool position this is becoming. Excellent, excellent, excellent trading. And of course, I love replications. So this is why we've been here talking about Bitcoin finally. And yeah, things have looked good the last couple of days. We did, as I said, the poll talking about whether Elon's going to start talking about crypto again. It's coming closer to the election. I wouldn't be surprised at all for all of this to crescendo into that point. And you'll notice here, we're now exactly on the downward trend line. So effectively, for a lot of people, this is going to be the resistance they want broken. We need 68.5 to be closed above. Already, things are coming in a lot more bullish. If they do pull back, we're going to have to expect bulls to be generally around. Flows are improving. The market is improving. Things are looking much better. And I think they're all stacking up together. And that's the key. We saw coin with huge dark pool transactions again about a month ago. All of this has bled into this kind of move that we're seeing so far. So I'd love to see Bitcoin break through 68.5, and then of course the alts to start coming as well. So Ethereum still not through the high. Many opportunities in the crypto markets should Bitcoin crack through. But remember, Bitcoin leads, the rest tend to follow. So it usually goes Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and then the rest. And that's kind of the way that the crypto market trades. When it comes to news this week, do remember that core retail sales is coming out on Thursday. Big news on Thursday is, of course, TSM and the banks. not the banks, TSM and Netflix. And core retail sales will be important. And as always, if you're interested in following us along this earnings season, it's already looking like a spectacular one, then make sure to hit that subscribe button. And of course, if you're from Sydney as well, join us on October 30th. There's a couple of seats left, not too many left now, to join us for our free seminar. And if you're interested in finding out more about what we do, follow us on some of the socials. And of course, check out our flash sale if you want to learn more about replication. I can tell you one thing, that Bitcoin trade, it's in the money right now. And that's, of course, the type of replication that you would be looking for. And that's why we get excited about markets, because when you see the replication, when you see something that's playing the game that you would usually statistically have advantage on, that's when you want to be a trader. Investors, a little bit different. You're just basically looking for ideas and coming up with a broad-based macro plan. All right, thanks so much, guys. Bye for now.